Okay. So lately, I've been really into this whole world of like holistic therapies, you know?
Yeah,
It seems like it's everywhere. Meditation apps, mindfulness workshops, even hypnotherapy is having a moment.
it really is.
And it got me thinking we should like really dive deep and unpack this whole treat the whole person approach.
Totally.
So that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got a ton of articles, websites, all sorts of interesting stuff to dig into.
I'm excited. This stuff is super fascinating, how it's all gaining traction.
For sure. It seems like there's a real shift happening in how we think about well-being.
Yeah, definitely.
And speaking of shifts, one of the things I came across is this definition of holism as systems being more than just the sum of their parts. A little abstract, I know, so maybe you can help us out here. What does that actually mean, like practically speaking?
Well, think about it this way. Your health, it's not just about your physical body, right?
Right.
It's also about your mind, your emotions, maybe even a spiritual side. And holistic therapies really take all of that into account.
Mm.
They recognize this interconnectedness of your whole being.
So instead of just like putting a Band-Aid on a symptom, you're looking at the whole picture to figure out what's going on.
Exactly. And it's really interesting.
What?
This deep dive is particularly relevant because we actually have a wellness career change guide in our stack of sources today.
Get out.
I know. It seems like this field is really ripe for people who are thinking about a career change.
Wow.
So if you're listening and you've ever thought about a career in this area, pay attention.
This one's for you.
Definitely.
So to really wrap our heads around holistic therapy, I think we need to meet some of the pioneers, right?
Yeah.
First up, Carl Rogers, the father of person-centered therapy. Now, from what I understand, he received a major award from the American Psychological Association back in 1956 for his work.
Yeah, he did. And it was a really big deal. It wasn't just any award, it highlighted the huge impact Rogers had on therapy.
Mm.
Like, he completely revolutionized the therapist-client relationship.
Oh, wow. How so?
He emphasized empathy, creating this safe space for people to explore their own inner worlds.
So instead of the therapist being the expert with all the answers, they're more of a guide.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. So person-centered therapy, it works on principles like unconditional positive regard, which basically means the therapist fully accepts the client without judgment.
That makes sense.
And they really strive to understand the world from the client's perspective.
That's so important.
It is. And get this,
Yeah.
our sources say Rogers is ranked as the 6th most eminent psychologist of the entire 20th century.
Wow.
I know, and not only that, he's considered the 2nd most influential clinician right after Freud.
That's huge.
It really speaks to his lasting impact. Rogers truly believed in our potential for growth and what he called self-actualization. And his approach gives people the tools to actually tap into that potential.
So this whole idea of empowering communication, I mean, it really stands out to me here. And it reminds me of another big name we should talk about, Marshall Rosenberg and his work on nonviolent communication, or NVC, as it's often called.
Yes.
Do you see a connection between his work and these core principles of person-centered therapy that we were just talking about?
Absolutely. They're totally connected. NVC is all about fostering empathy and understanding in communication.
Mm-hmm.
So it encourages us to express our needs clearly, but also to be receptive to the needs of others.
And when you think about it, like so much conflict could be avoided if we all just had those NVC skills.
Right.
It just shows you the power of communication in any setting, really, but especially, I would think, in, helping professions.
Oh, for sure. Imagine like a therapist or a counselor who can approach their clients with that level of empathy and understanding. I mean, that could be huge.
Totally. Speaking of huge, our next stop on this little deep dive is Gestalt therapy, which was developed by Fritz Perls.
Yes.
And this one, really stood out to me because of its focus on personal responsibility and the present moment. So what's the story there?
Well, Gestalt therapy, it's really about becoming aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors right now in the present moment.
Okay.
And by understanding how your past experiences might be influencing you right now, you can start to make more conscious choices about everything.
It's like connecting the dots, I guess.
Exactly.
You got it.
And seeing the patterns.
Yeah, for sure. Now, something that I think is important to clarify here is that Gestalt therapy, it's not the same thing as Gestalt psychology, right?
That's a really important distinction. A lot of people get those two confused.
Yeah.
Actually, one of our sources, Edwin Navis, he had a good way of putting it. He said, therapists use Gestalt psychology as the foundation for their practice.
So it's like Gestalt psychology is like the theory, and then Gestalt therapy is how those principles get applied in a therapeutic setting.
Precisely. And speaking of its application, Gestalt therapy really took off in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, wow. Really?
But here's something even more interesting. It's making a comeback.
No way.
Yeah, it's true. Apparently, Vikram Kolmanskog just became the first professor of Gestalt therapy.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. It seems like this whole field of holistic therapies is constantly evolving, you know.
It really is.
This whole idea of awareness in Gestalt therapy, it makes me think about another practice that seems to be everywhere these days. Mindfulness.
Oh, yeah. And it's no coincidence that mindfulness goes hand in hand with so many holistic approaches.
Oh, how so?
Well, mindfulness is rooted in Buddhist traditions, and it's basically about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
So imagine you're feeling stressed. Mindfulness encourages you to just notice those feelings, like watch them as if they were clouds passing by, rather than getting, totally swept away by them.
I love that image of the clouds passing by. And the best part is you don't need to be like a meditation master to actually benefit from mindfulness, right? I mean, there are so many apps, there are resources available now that it's pretty much accessible to anyone.
Yeah, you're right. And the really cool thing is there's actual science backing this stuff up.
Get out!
I know, right? Studies that have used fMRI and EEG, they've shown measurable changes in brain activity with meditation.
Wow.
Especially in areas related to attention, emotional regulation, even self-awareness.
Okay, so now we're talking about some really cool stuff. We went from person-centered therapy to Gestalt therapy to mindfulness. It seems like all of these approaches, even though their methods might be different, I'm kind of noticing a theme here. They all focus on tapping into your own inner resources.
You're totally right. And that brings us to another super fascinating area that, honestly, I think often gets misunderstood: hypnotherapy.
Woo.
And one name that really stands out in this field is Milton Erickson. He was a psychiatrist who actually specialized in medical hypnosis.
Medical hypnosis, that's a combination I haven't heard before.
Yeah, he was really on the cutting edge. Erickson was a real innovator. He even started integrating hypnosis with family therapy, which was unheard of at the time.
Wow.
And get this, his influence went way beyond hypnotherapy too. He shaped fields like brief therapy and even neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, as it's more commonly known.
It's amazing how these pioneers, each in their own way, they really pushed the boundaries of, how we understand the mind and what it's capable of.
They really did.
But let's talk about hypnotherapy a little bit, because I think for a lot of people, when they hear hypnotherapy, they think stage hypnosis,
Right.
So what is it really?
Well, essentially, hypnotherapy uses hypnosis, but as a therapeutic tool, right?
Okay.
So it guides someone into a state of deep relaxation, really focused attention, and in that state, they're more open to suggestion.
Mm.
And it's important to be clear, this is different from the whole stage hypnosis thing.
Yeah.
That's mostly for entertainment.
Right.
Therapeutic hypnosis, on the other hand, it helps people access their subconscious mind
Okay.
to address, different issues.
So we're not talking about mind control or anything like that.
No, not at all.
It's more about tapping into your own inner wisdom for positive change.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it might seem a little out there to some people.
Right.
But there's actually more and more evidence coming out that shows how effective it can be.
Really?
Yeah, studies have shown that it can be really promising for things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and even some of those, uncomfortable symptoms that come with menopause.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone from person-centered therapy to Gestalt therapy to mindfulness to hypnotherapy.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, but it seems like all of these approaches, even though they have their own unique methods, they all kind of share a common thread, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation.
What is that thread?
They all recognize and really emphasize, I think, the individual's capacity for growth, for healing, for self-discovery. It's not about forcing solutions from the outside.
Yep.
It's about empowering each person to tap into their own inner wisdom.
We all have this potential within us.
Exactly.
And these holistic therapies are kind of different paths to help us unlock it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And speaking of paths, I noticed that in our research, there was a whole bunch of other things listed under this umbrella of holistic therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Everything from acupuncture and aromatherapy to Tai Chi and Reiki.
I know. It's incredible how many different approaches there are.
Yeah, it really speaks to the diversity, like the richness of this whole world.
It is. What we've talked about today is really just like scratching the surface.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
It's just the tip of the iceberg.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of holistic therapies and all these amazing people who've, shaped it, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We've explored some really powerful approaches, but I think the most important thing to remember is that the best path, the most effective holistic path, is the one that's tailored to each individual person.
Mm,
So think of this deep dive as like a starting point, an invitation to explore and see what resonates with you.
love that.
Your own journey of discovery, it starts with curiosity and an open mind.
This was amazing. Thanks so much for geeking out on this stuff with me today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.